We have with us former two-term governor of the state of South Dakota and a current United States Senator, Mr. Rounds. How about a round of applause?
Come here. Let me, first, you guys all know this guy, Jack Elliott, I presume. If not, I'm very happy to have him here today because he has the privilege and the opportunity to have been nominated and accepted to the United States Naval Academy. And so beginning this fall, actually beginning on July 1st or so, late June, he's going to be moving into an entirely different role in life. And they're going to make life kind of miserable for him for a few months, but they're also going to provide him with probably one of the finest educations you can ever get, which is in one of our academies. The Air Force Academy, the Naval Academy, West Point, and so forth. And so this is one that is sought after, and we're very, very proud that Jack made the grade, and he will be serving his country in the United States Navy, and he'll be receiving probably one of the best educations that we can offer in the United States. But it's quite an accomplishment. It says a lot about Jack, but it also says a lot about this school because the competition out there is huge, and you've got to have the academics in order to make it, and you've got to have the personal drive and determination as well. So Jack, I just wanted to say congratulations.
Thank you.
Very, very well done. Well, good morning. Early in the morning, but it's a Friday, right? Which is better than being a Monday, right? Okay. How many juniors do we have here? How many seniors do we have here? How many underclassmen do we have here? All right, great. Well, it's good to see you all. I'm only going to talk for just a few minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the most. And then I want to open it up and we'll try to answer as many questions until they tell me that I'm all done and that I've bored everybody enough, and then we'll go from there. First, thanks for the opportunity. Second of all, you live in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, which has a city government that actually works the way it's supposed to. You live in a state where the state government actually works the way that our founding fathers wanted it to work in the first place. You live in a country which has a national government which is challenged. In other words, it doesn't work as well as it could work. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit today. Because what it amounts to is in this country we have lots of people with lots of different points of view and lots of ideas about how to make things better, which is a good thing. The question is, how do you work with other people from across an entire country to try to make things actually get better? When you think about the things that we've got to do and the requirements that the founding fathers actually wanted us to do, you have to start with, they always wanted us to defend this country. It's what created this government in the first place. They wanted the federal government responsible for the defense of the country, interstate commerce, basically the transaction of business between the states, and roads and bridges, constitutionally directed. Well, when you look at that versus what's happened in the United States over years and years and years is more and more things have been directives from the federal government back down to the state governments and so forth, which has caused friction. Some people think we need more of it. Other people think we need less of that federal activity. That creates challenges for all of us. In Washington today, I can tell you there are good people on all sides of the issues. And everybody talks about the differences and about the challenges between the executive branch and the legislative branch and the judiciary and how we go about picking Supreme Court judges and so forth. But I can tell you that on a one-on-one basis, the vast majority of all the people that I work with in Washington, those that are elected, those that we work with on a day-to-day basis, they're really good people. And I'm not talking just Republican or just Democrat. Across the board, they are really good people. They're the kind of people that you'd like to have for your neighbors. They're not there because they're necessarily mad about something. They're there because they cared enough to actually want to be involved. Once they get there, They have these principles that they have established and that they've talked to other people about. They've worked their way, whether it's a matter of, I got to make the defense of our country stronger because it's not as strong as it should be. Or for those who say, I believe firmly that we've got a tax policy that's broken and it's got to be fixed. Or others that say it's equality and we have to work towards more equality. All of those different items that drove people, brought people together that had principles strong enough to make them want to leave their homes and go work in a place like Washington, D.C. And once they got there, they found that there were other people that had just as strong of principles, but they maybe didn't believe in the same way of getting there. They had different tactics to be used. And that creates frictions. But let me just share this with you. It's not new. This is not something that is new to the way that our country is today. Our founding fathers fought they fought a revolutionary war. They fought a war for their own freedom. These were men, and in many cases women, that put their lives on the line to challenge the greatest military might in the world, Great Britain, in 1776, because they thought they wanted something different than what they had for government. They wanted freedom, but they wanted it with a new form of government that they truly believed was better than what they had. They wanted a republic. They wanted a democracy. They wanted something that did not exist and was not shown to exist anyplace else in the world. And they knew, as Ben Franklin suggested, that once they started down this path, you've perhaps heard this before, Ben Franklin said, surely we must hang together, because if we do not hang together, we shall most certainly hang separately. They knew that what they were doing, they knew that they'd put their lives on the line. They fought side by side to create this country. But once they had gained their independence, now the really hard work started. They had to figure out how they would actually govern without a king. How do we create this republic? What does it amount to? And how do those little colonies with small populations protect themselves from the direction and oversight of those big colonies with big populations? They had to figure this all out. And it didn't happen overnight. And in fact, you had individuals who had fought side by side, who had protected each other, and who put each other's lives in their own hands during the time of fighting, who then found themselves opposed to one another because the principles upon which this country was going to be based were being decided, and they had differing points of view. Alexander Hamilton is today the subject of a play. But Alexander Hamilton is one of those individuals who, after having participated in the creation of the Articles of Confederation and the final Constitution itself in 1787, to be ratified in 1788. Think about this. Our country declares its independence in 1776. It's 12 years later before we actually, as a nation, have this Constitution set up. But during that time period, they fought with one another. These were men and women of principle who had differing points of view, but who, as Alexander Hamilton suggested, that the only way to make this work is to indulge those who have a different point of view. What he was talking about is what's made this country different from a lot of other countries. We have recognized a long-term goal of finding a common ground that's better than what we had before. And sometimes that means people of principle have to look to others who have principles of a differing point of view and agree to indulge one another, respecting the principles that others have as well. In other words, they had to compromise. Now think about that. Men and women who fought side by side during a revolutionary war and who were clearly men and women of principle decided that for the better good of their country, they would indulge one another and they would compromise. If you don't believe me, look at what created the government of this country today. Those colonies formed, but they wanted the colonies to still have something to say about how things were going to be run in this new place of Washington, D.C. someday. They created the United States Senate so that every one of these new states had at least 2 voices in one chamber. And then, for those big colonies with high populations, they created the House of Representatives based on the population of each one of those colonies, those new states. And in doing so, they created what is today the Connecticut Compromise or the Great Compromise. That compromise did not satisfy anybody, but it was indulging one another that allowed our country to be formed in the first place. They fought about who was going to do trade. They didn't want the president, this new office over there, to be powerful. So they kept the ability to create trade deals in this new legislative body they called Congress. They compromised on it. And in doing so, they allowed for the first time in the immediate history for the creation of a republic that has now lasted, at least if we make it until 2026, and I think we will, for 250 years. So, what I'm sharing with you today is Washington, D.C. may very well not work very effectively. And we've got new things that we want to do. But don't give up. And don't accept the idea that principled people cannot sit down with one another, work through their issues, and find a compromise that moves our country forward. That's the basis upon which it was formed in the first place. Now, with that, let me just open this up, and I'd be happy to answer questions that you may have about what's going on in Washington or around the country today. Who wants to be first? Oh, come on. Okay, Mr. Grimm, you're up. Oh, here we go, right over here.
So my question is about the joint resolution in the Senate. They called for ending U.S. support for the war in Yemen. So considering that 75% of Americans support the resolution, and what Saudi Arabia's coalition has been doing in Yemen has already killed tens of thousands, I'm just kind of wondering why you supported the resolution, or excuse me, voted against the resolution.
Yeah, the resolution that we're talking about here was a joint resolution, and what it said was is that the United States could not support Saudi Arabia in the war that they're fighting right now with the Houthis, and the Houthis are a local group that's basically taken over Yemen. Yemen is a neighbor to the south of Saudi Arabia. They were firing missiles from Yemen into Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia decided they'd had enough, and they went in to attack Yemen. And in doing so, there's been a huge humanitarian loss there. It is really bad in Yemen for a number of reasons. Part of it's because of the war, part of it's because of the lack of any governing activity there in Yemen, except for this group that's there, the Houthis, which are backed by the arch enemy of the Saudi Arabia government, which is Iran. So Iran's got their operatives in Yemen working with the Houthis, who are firing missiles into Saudi Arabia, which created Saudi Arabia then wanting to go in and attack Yemen. There was put into the House of Representatives and into the Senate a resolution saying that the United States could not support them in that war. I voted against it for a couple of reasons. Number one, remember this came at the same time that Mr. Khashoggi, the journalist, was killed in the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. And it's pretty clear that Saudi Arabia not only did it, but they killed this guy. They got him in, they lured him in, and they killed him. Okay? When that happened, as part of the response to that was this resolution gained a lot of support saying, we're going to send a message to Saudi Arabia. I think we should separate the two. Number one, Mr. Khashoggi's death is absolutely unacceptable, and there has to be direct action from the United States and Saudi Arabia based upon what they did. Now, they've been an ally of ours. They're going to continue to be an ally, but what they did was wrong, flat out. The question for many of our members was, is this the best way to send a message to Saudi Arabia saying, let's pass this thing that say that we can't provide them with support in this war. And what we were doing was, number one, providing them with aiming capabilities, the ability to actually hit specific targets with smart munitions. And second of all, we were refueling some of their aircraft during this time period. I felt that they had to separate the two issues. For Khashoggi, yes, let's go after that. But when it came to telling an ally that they could not defend their country against another outside force who was shooting rockets into their country, I didn't think that we could necessarily tell them that they were doing that for the wrong reasons. We also felt in discussions, and we had a number of classified discussions on this, where they came in and gave us specific information about what they were trying to do to impact the attitude and the actual inner workings and operations of the Saudi military. Most of us in the Senate felt that it was better to actually work with them to try to make sure that if they were going to attack places in Yemen, that they do it as selectively as possible. And if we didn't provide them with the ability to do selective targets, then what they would end up doing would be carpet bombing type stuff, which would kill more civilians. And as part of that, we felt it necessary to continue to participate with them to see if we could actually influence their behavior in their attack on Yemen. If we would have said no, if this actually could have occurred and we would have been pulled out of it, they would have changed the way that they would have protected their own country, and that they would have unleashed, in our opinion, a significant amount of weapons in a more non-discriminating way, which would have been even worse on the civilian population that was there. So that was the logic behind a number of us feeling very concerned about walking away from this ally that we have. And we didn't think that we should use Khashoggi to stop the war in Yemen, where they were trying to defend themselves. Khashoggi, definitely, as we move forward, you will find more of us actually finding ways to send a message to the government of Saudi Arabia that what they did there was a separate issue and it has to be addressed. We're not going to forget about it. Okay, thank you. I'll try to do a quicker job on those, but that's a really important one because that's a big deal in DC right now. What else?
How do we address the man-made islands that China is creating in, I think it's the South China Sea? What do we do to curb that?
What we have right now, China, over the next 25 to 50 years, will be our primary competitor economically and militarily. And it's going to be up to China as to whether they want to be an aggressor when it comes to the military or whether they want to be a peacekeeper, like what the United States tries to be. Now, China has decided that because they have a long culture, that they have not been respected by the rest of the world the way that they think they should. President Xi is now sending the message that he is now president for life. President for life. Doesn't have to get reelected anymore. And he now has 25-year plans. And part of what they're doing is a Belt and Road economic policy, which says the belt is the economy of China is going to take a belt like all the way down through the South Pacific, around India and back up into the Gulf and into Africa. And then the road, as they call it, the One Belt, One Road, is across Asia, through Russia, into Europe, and so forth. And they want them all to lead back to China, to where they are part of the major worldwide economy, similar to what the United States is today. They'd love to have their money be the international money of choice. They want to be the center of worldwide attention. And they believe, based on their population, that they can be. But in doing so now, what they're also saying is that they don't have the same basic built-in rights and wrongs that the rest of the traditional order of the world is today. They disagree with the idea of intellectual property being something that you can own. They don't believe in patents. They don't believe in copyrights. And they know that they have to change that attitude, but right now, to them, they don't understand how anybody can own an idea. They think that ideas can't be owned. So they don't see anything wrong with someone who has a patent just taking it. If you can steal it, you can steal it. There's nothing wrong with that because you can't own it. Well, in the South China Sea, what they've said is this is going to be a shipping lane that we're going to control. And if you want to ship through here, you're going to have to know that we control it, that our military is watching it. We'll let those through that are appropriate, and we don't intend to let those through that are not appropriate. We will make that decision. So what they started doing was stepping away from the mainland, and they went back out to reefs and so forth, and they started building those reefs up. And on some small islands that actually, according to the World Court, are owned by island states such as the Philippines, they've gone in and said, we disagree with the World Court on that. We're going to take them, and oh, by the way, for peaceful purposes, we're going to start building bases here, seaports and so forth. What they've actually done is built them up, bringing in the sand and the rock and so forth, and they've made long bases where they are now putting in military-type operations. They're including their warships at those locations. They're making military bases. We've told them very clearly that we think that they're wrong and that we're not going to accept that as being part of China, and that we're going to continue through what we call freedom of navigation to send our ships right on by those islands, even though China says that's an aggressive action. We can't let them continue to push their way out into the South China Sea and take over that as if it's an inland sea of China. So that's the point that they're making. And the best way that we can do it is number one, we have to continue to tell China, we're going to sail right by those, and you better not stop anybody from coming through that area. That's an open sea. And second of all, we've reminded them that unlike an aircraft carrier, which can be hidden and difficult to find in the vast expanse of the South China Sea as well as the Pacific, those are fixed bases. And if they ever become a military threat, they are most certainly at risk, and there's not much that you can do about it. So we do two things. Number one, we let them know that we will not accept it in terms of aggression towards other countries in the area who are our allies. And second of all, you can continue down the path of being a part of the trade of the rest of the world, or if you decide that you're going to try to do your own thing based upon your rules, which the rest of the country, the rest of the world does not accept, we're going to have a problem. And if that's the case, we will be able to, and we will respond to you, and we will stand up to you. And that's one of the reasons why you've seen a repurposing of our military back from just fighting terrorism to what we call fighting major power competition, where we have major powers in Russia and in China both of whom have military extreme capabilities within cyberspace, within space, and then on air, land, and sea with military or with nuclear weapons included in their arsenals that they have continued to upgrade and expand the capabilities of. So that's the reason why you're seeing a significant buildup in our military, is because of the types of actions that you're seeing with China in the South China Sea. Now we have to find ways of getting to those from a longer range off, because they will eventually put missiles on them in order to attack our aircraft carriers that are farther out at sea. And that's the risk that we have, and the reason why we can't stand back and let them simply do it without confrontation. Yes?
Environmentally, what efforts has America taken to improve, like, decrease carbon emissions and waste in the oceans?
Let me repeat it. What has America done to actually improve on an environmental basis the challenges we find with carbon emissions and so forth? Is that kind of the I think the best evidence of American success is the fact that today, even though we have one of the strongest economies in the world right now, you'll find that of total emissions right now, we're about 13% of what the entire world is. Our competition out there, India and China, amount to in excess of 33%. Now, part of it's because with their economies and so forth, they don't have the technological capabilities that we do. In many cases, they still burn wood. They burn a lot of what I call dirty coal, not clean coal. We have capabilities because we've expanded our economy to where we actually have ways of doing different types of fuels on a more efficient basis than what some of our trade competitors are able to do. In the future, I'm still convinced that we can do more, but in order to do more, you have to have an economy that can support it. So there are some folks out there that say, we want to clean our economy up, or our environment up, but we want to do it by specifically saying you can't use this particular energy source and you can't use that particular energy source. I think what we tried to do in the United States Senate, and I said on the Environment and Public Works Committee, what we said instead is let's not pick winners and losers with regard to what is considered to be the right power source. Let's do an all of the above, but set out our goals for reducing the total emissions that we see coming in. There's also something else going on. There's a discussion publicly about whether or not there is such a thing as climate change. It's not up for debate. There is climate change. The question that most of us have is what do you do about climate change, and how much can you do it, how much of it is natural, how much of it is man-made? I've been to the Arctic. I've seen it. Clearly, we're in a warming cycle. We have an increasing sea level right now. I have friends from other states along the coastlines. They're concerned right now because as the sea level rises, they're going to see parts of their states literally have inundation. And when you have a storm, the water comes farther and farther inland each time. The question is not, do we want to eliminate pollution? The question is how to do it technologically, and how do you address it so that you don't destroy your economy doing so. And as we face more and more to the fact of not just saying there is climate change, you start to address the fact of what does man do and how does man control it in the future, and how do we do that without shutting down our economy. There are some folks out there that said, and look, you heard about the new Green Deal. Okay, it was not ready for hatching, but it was hatched. And what they suggested out there was some things like, we basically don't want livestock anymore. We're going to have to get away from cars. We're probably not going to be using aircraft. That's not something that necessarily works. But what you can do is using technology, you can move to more efficient ways of delivering energy and do it in such a way that you can eliminate as many of those emissions as possible. But even if the United States were to eliminate all of its emissions, even if we were perfect, we're not going to change what is going on with the release of carbon until the other countries are capable of doing the same things as well. I'm not even afraid to talk about the fact that at some point in the future, as we move forward, we're going to have to find ways to actually draw carbon back out of the atmosphere in the future. How do you do it? Grow trees is one way. Grow trees. Just an example of what you could do, but yeah.
Do you think it's America's obligation to keep other, as a world power, to keep other nations accountable for their carbon emissions and environmental?
Is it America's obligation to keep the others accountable for their emissions? I think you can try to work with other nations, but as each country is actually autonomous, you have to recognize their sovereignty. So you have to work with them, but in terms of trying to use a stick, that won't work. That's not really what we should be doing. What we should be doing is finding ways, number one, to make certain that we are still as economically competitive as we can possibly be, so that we can grow our economy, so that we can afford to do the experimentation, to do the things that actually can be adopted in many cases by other countries. I'm just going to use an example. Everybody says, oh, you can't use coal. That's not true. You can do things with coal right now that make it a clean coal technology. But there's other things you can do as well. It's a matter of what happened to nuclear? There's a lot of people out there that are really concerned about the environment, but they say, oh, not nuclear. We're going to need nuclear in the future. We shouldn't simply walk away from nuclear, and we should be doing everything we can to make it as safe and as efficient as possible. All I'm saying is it is a doable thing, but you have to recognize, number one, climate change does exist. And I think there's a lot of folks out there that continue to say, well, there's a group of people that don't believe in it. There really is not. And in fact, the United States Senate is on, I believe, unanimous record account from 2015, actually putting out a resolution recognizing that. But it still becomes something to shift in between the parties. One party saying, well, we believe in climate change and you guys don't. Another party saying, my party, saying, no, we understand it's happening, but if we're going to do something about it, let's do something about it that we can actually afford to sustain and recognize that America itself can't fix this problem. Other nations have got to participate in this as well. What else? Okay. Right here, yeah.
Do you think that the wall is worth the billions of dollars that they're going to spend on it?
Oh, yeah, let me talk about the wall for a second. Because it really, if you think about it, a lot of stuff going on in D.C. is based on what the president wants to do, which he says, and he says it publicly, he says, I want to build a wall. And when you ask him in private what it is, he said, people understand strength when they hear about a wall. He said, so I talk about a wall, but he said, what we're really talking about is a border security system. Let me give you some quick facts on it just to give a sense of where this is going, okay? Along the international border between the United States and Mexico, it's 1,954 miles long. Part of it's just the Rio Grande River, okay? But it's 1,954 miles. We've already got 654 miles of either pedestrian or vehicle barriers, or as some people would call them, a wall. But there's 654 miles that's already in place. There's 4 other presidents that have actually put those in place. Now, President Trump made it a campaign discussion. And as such, he elevated the rhetoric on it on both sides, okay? We do need to be able to defend our borders just like any nation needs to defend its borders, okay? What he wanted to do was to put in another 234 miles. That would have been about $5 billion. Angus King, who is an independent, but he caucuses with the Democrats, Angus and I agreed to put our names on a bipartisan proposal back in February of 2017 that basically said, look, what we're going to do, we'll provide the president with $25 billion, $2.5 billion a year over 10 years. And with that, we can systematically begin to build up the border with the border security systems, build the roads along it, put in fencing in some places, put in actual barriers in other places, but also to fix the ports of entry to make it easier for legal immigration to move back and forth, and so that goods and services can move back and forth. But $25 billion not only authorized, but appropriated. We got 54 votes in the floor of the Senate for that proposal. Included in that was addressing the issue of the Dreamers. Remember what the Dreamers are? These are the kids that came in. It's about 1.8 million of them. They came into the country, their parents brought them in. They were under the age of 18. Their moms and dads did violate the law, but the kids didn't have much to do with that. They were brought in by their parents. These young men and women serve in our military today. They go to college today. By definition, that makes them a dreamer. But they don't have citizenship, and they don't have what we call legal status, meaning if they wanted to get a job, they can't. And yet they can serve in our military because we allow them to do so. We allow them to go to college right now under President Obama's directions, okay? What we try to do is to fix this because we need young people in our country to stay here, to go to school, to serve in our military, and so forth. So what Angus and I put together was a deal that said for a period of 7 years, this group of people could stay in our country with legal status. And then at the end of 7 years, if they're clean, if they're not committing crimes, they could then apply for citizenship, and over a period of 5 years, they could get their citizenship. So it'd be a 12-year cycle for them to do that. But in the meantime, they could be here legally. And they could work, they could go to school, and so forth. What they could not do was, as a citizen, until 12 years from now, is sponsor their parents. Because their parents had violated the law, and we do not have a consensus on what we do with these people that are here today illegally in our country and who violated our law to get here. And that is still the case today. It's the biggest challenge we have in reforming our immigration system in the United States, which clearly does not work. It does not work today. On the border, right now, here's the challenge and the reason why the president has put so much emphasis on this. Not so much people from Mexico, but people from El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala in an area that is economically really challenged right now, but who also have a lot of drug violence and so forth. They're being solicited by coyotes, by people who, as a part of their way of making a living, they come in and they tell them, hey, listen, if you come to the United States because of the laws in the United States today, if you bring a child with you and you come to the border, all you gotta do is get across that border. If you get across that border, go find one of the border people, one of the border security people, and tell them that you're coming in and you're claiming asylum. You're claiming that you want to leave your country, and you're coming in with your child for asylum, because you're not safe in your home country. And under current United States law, we can't send them back at that point. We have to wait for them to get a court appointment for a judge to determine whether or not they qualify for asylum. That means then that they basically, as long as they have a child with them after, I believe, 2 weeks or 21 days, they are released. They basically get a bus ticket to go to where they want to go, with a promise to appear in court between 18 months and 2 years later. We're running between 60 and 75,000 people a month coming in that way. In the meantime, our border security people are overrun. These people aren't trying to get away. They're coming in and saying, take me in. What happens then is they're inundated. Well, in the meantime, the bad guys, people that are running drugs and so forth, they're free to go a little bit farther away from those borders, those ports of entry, and they're bringing in all sorts of narcotics. Heroin, meth, fentanyl, and so forth, to the tune of multiple times what it was just a few years ago. How long does it take them to get it from the border up to the farthest parts north? About 4 days. If you find fentanyl, if you find meth in this part of the country today, the chances are very, very good it came across our southern border within the last week. That's the challenge that we have, and the reason why the president has pushed so hard to try to do something about that border security. And in the meantime, these young men and women that are coming up from the south, bringing a child with them, about 70% of them find themselves in harm's way somewhere along the way. It's not a good thing. And until such time as our laws allow us to send a message that they do not qualify for asylum unless they can prove asylum, and to do it in an expedited manner, we're going to continue to have people looking at better economic opportunities in the United States than what they find in their home countries. The other piece that's missing in our current policy, we have to find a way to help those countries to be more economically viable and safer so that their people don't feel the need to come north in the first place. That's part of our state policies that we don't do a very good job on today.
So we got time for about 2 more questions.
Okay. I may run out of questions, you never know. Oh, yeah.
Here,
Oh,
for
her.
Oh, there we go, okay.
So recently there's been a group of individuals stopping Mexicans from coming to the border. Do you agree with what they're doing?
Okay, recently, there has been a group of militiamen that have been stopping people at the border, from what I understand. And I haven't read a lot about it, but the question is, do I agree with them? I do not agree with militiamen taking the law into their own hands. In some cases, these are individuals who may very well have encouraged other folks to follow them, telling them that they are correct, but the evidence does not point to them being legally able to do what they're doing. So I'd much rather have the law enforcement personnel doing the enforcement efforts, and if they need additional assistance, I'd much prefer not to have individuals deputizing themselves in order to do it. I think that creates the abilities for untrained individuals in confrontations where they get themselves hurt, but they get other people hurt as well. Yes, sir.
I was reading through your website and I came to your section where you had the immigration section, and I read that you strongly disagree with President Obama's executive action on illegal immigrants and having them in the amnesty. So can you enlighten us and tell us, like, if you support it or why people are supporting it?
Sure. Yeah, and in fact, what what the gentleman was talking about is President Obama created by executive order the Dreamers. That's what we're talking about. And what he said is by executive order, I'm going to say that it's okay for you to have legal status in the country. And in doing so, he created a confrontation with the legislative branch of government, who is responsible for reforming our immigration laws. What he did was, number one, irritate one aisle, and at the same time take the pressure off the other side of the aisle to actually try to fix the problem. This is something that needs to be fixed at the congressional level, not by a directive by a president. And that's the reason why I disagree with him on it. It's the reason why we find right now in the United States today, there were a lot of people that were told that if you can get to the United States with your kids would be identified as being dreamers, and thus they could stay in the United States with legal status, which drove more people to come to the United States border in an attempt to get into the border, which helped to create a part of the problem that we had. What I think should have done, what should have happened, was the president most certainly could have went to Congress and said, here's what I want to do. This is the legislation that I think you should pass. Let's find a way to address the problem which is there, and then to have found that compromise that would have allowed for the border security necessary and for the enforcement along the border to stop those who are coming in illegally, but then to address the issue of the young people that he saw as being an important part of our country moving forward. He did it out of compassion, but I think he made a mistake. I think the mistake he made was trying to do it himself rather than taking what was a harder approach, which is going to Congress and saying, you need to change the law. And he knew very good and well that it would create a backlash, but it was easier to do it by executive order and then make people work their way around the executive order. So I agree we need to address the issue with these young people, but you do it the right way, which is by congressional action. What the president said at that time was, I don't think you guys will do it, so I'm just going to do it myself. That's where you have the constitutional issues start to pop up. That's where you have the court cases start to get involved. And that's the reason why I disagree with what he did. Anything else? I've got people pointing in this direction. Oh, right here. There we are. Yeah.
So as we look to 2020, we sort of see a lot of Democratic candidates, and actually in 2018 as well, who swore off campaign contributions from PACs and super PACs. And that's not necessarily something we saw on the Republican side of the aisle. So as a prominent member of the Republican Party like yourself, why do you think there exists that discrepancy between Democrats and Republicans on that issue?
Yeah, there's different ways of financing campaigns. One way is you can go out and ask for direct contributions from individuals. The other way, unlike in South Dakota you can't get business contributions. In congressional activity, you can get political action committees, which is where individuals in a particular business can band together, put all their stuff into a political action committee, and then they can give that to you. A lot of the Democrats that are running, most of them are in the United States Senate, and they've just said, look, we're going to take it directly from individuals. We're not going to go to the collective program of a political action committee to get that money. I think most Republicans will tell you that political action committees were originally established to compete with labor unions. And when labor unions would put their dollars in years ago, they would support, in many cases, more liberal-leaning policies, many of which were Democrat, receiving those funds from the labor unions. Republicans, on the other side, were more business-oriented in many cases, or they were seen that way. And they didn't see those business owners being able to band together, similar to what your labor teams did with the labor union programs. So they created, back when they did the reforms, or at least they called them reforms back in the 1970s and the 1980s, they created this opportunity for a political action committee to be formed, made up of people that were in business or organizations that associated different types of of beliefs. That became and is today one of the major sources of income coming in for political campaigns. Both Republicans and Democrats have had PACs. Now, there's been differentiations between all sorts of different what they call 501c4s, 501c3s, and so forth, different types of PACs that have been established. But in essence, Republicans have used PACs more than they have labor union dollars. Democrats, in many cases, those who are more left-leaning, have said, I want to just go directly out to the people, and I'm going to use things like Act Blue and so forth as ways to get my money directly from people. They think it's politically advantageous for them to say, I'm not going to take from PACs that are associated with a particular business. For them, they think it's more politically correct and more popular to be able to use it as a campaign talking point to say, I'm going to get it directly from an individual rather than through a political action committee that person might be participating in. And Republicans just haven't seen that type of an uproar among Republicans to that, like some of your more liberal-leaning members on the other side are trying to get some of their more moderate members on the Democrat side to get pushed into a corner on it. And so for them, they see it as a talking point, and they see it as a way of differentiating themselves from other individuals within their own party. Anything else? Oh, right here. Yes, sir.
So there is a big push, especially on the Democratic side, of a socialist way. Do you agree with that? Where everyone has the same benefits and everyone has, it's fair, or do you still agree with the way that the government's working right now?
Yeah, I think Bernie Sanders, as a matter of fact, Bernie's in the Senate with us. Elizabeth Warren is in the Senate with us. More liberal in their approach on this. Bernie is an avowed socialist. Bernie has always said that he was a socialist, and he's straightforward about it. He believes that everybody should, regardless of how much money you make, there should be an amount which everybody gets, and then the amount above that amount, there should be a higher and higher tax on those who make more money. I think the best way to explain it is that there's a lot of people that believe that capitalism is a better approach. I'm one of them that thinks that there's a better way to do it. Capitalism is that the harder you work, the more that you deliver, the better opportunity you have to make more money, and you'll invest it back in, which grows the economy. Just because you have two kids and one of them works really, really hard, has an allowance, it doesn't mean that they should be forced to share that with their siblings simply because they have more. And I think that's the real basic debate that goes on. I believe that Bernie truly thinks he's right on this, and that it is for the betterment of the people that he wants to do it. I just simply can't point to a single place in history where socialism has actually worked the way that capitalism has. And if you take a look at what's going on in the United States and the reason that we are the economic superpower that we are, it's because we understand that you have to have, number one, you have to have capital, a resource. Second of all, you've got to have the ideas that are out there. And third, you've got to have people working, trying to accomplish it to get something done. I just think that's a much better way to do it than to say, we're all going to expect everybody to work, but those of you that work harder, you'll give part of yours to those that, for any reason, may not have worked or made as much or have contributed as much to the value that we have within the country. It's a differing point of view, a different philosophy. I just think our founding fathers were right when they said that government should not be making that decision, and Bernie would tell you that he thinks that government should make that decision for you. Look, thank you. You've been a very attentive group, and I appreciate the questions. If you want to learn more about this, let me just suggest something. We look for young people to participate in all of our offices. All senators do, all House members do. When you get out and you decide that you want to go to college and so forth, consider doing an internship. Consider coming and working in our Sioux Falls office, our Rapid City office, our Pierre office, or in our Washington, D.C. office. There's assistance for housing and so forth. It's a great experience, and it allows you to see government in action. The same way at the legislative session, if you haven't considered being a page in the legislature for a couple of weeks, consider being a page. And consider when you get to college, consider being an intern for the South Dakota legislature, because you'll see how government works. You see some really, really good people trying their best to make good decisions. I'll promise you, you'll never see a perfect decision being made. What you'll see are people trying their best to be a part of making good decisions because they really do love their state and they really do love their country. And with that, I thank you, participate, be a part of it. You truly are the future of this country, and we value what you have to offer. Thank you. Appreciate it.